Welcome to Crime Documentary, where we uncover the most shocking, twisted, and heartbreaking true crime cases from around the world. In today's story, we take you deep into the dark side of social media fame, a place where jealousy, betrayal, and rage collide with deadly consequences. This is the chilling case of Ali Abulaban, a TikTok star whose online persona masked a storm brewing beneath the surface. What began as viral dances and luxury lifestyles ended in a double homicide that shook America. Fame had brought him followers, but jealousy would cost him everything, including his freedom and 2 innocent lives. Asterisk. The luxury high-rise apartment stood tall above the glittering San Diego skyline, a glass giant that reflected the golden glow of the setting sun and the shimmering blue of the Pacific Ocean. From the outside, it looked like a perfect home for a man living the dream, a place where success whispered in every polished marble tile and expensive leather sofa. Inside, however, something unseen and far more dangerous was slowly growing between its walls. Ali Abulaban was a man whose life on TikTok had been crafted with precision, each video showing him smiling in expensive clothes, driving sleek cars, or posing in carefully chosen locations that screamed wealth and style. To his hundreds of thousands of followers, he was the symbol of charm, confidence, and success. They saw the man who could make them laugh with quick skits or inspire them with flashy lifestyle shots. They saw the man who seemed to have it all. But what they did not see was the shadow that followed him when the phone camera stopped recording. Ali's marriage with Aina had once been full of love and passion, the kind of connection that seemed unbreakable in the early days. They would spend long nights talking and laughing, dreaming about the future they would build together. But as Ali's fame grew, so did the cracks in their relationship. His focus shifted from their private life to the endless demand for more content, more engagement, more likes. The pressure to perform for an audience, mixed with the growing attention from strangers online, began to change the way they looked at each other. For Aina, the man she had fallen in love with was slipping away, replaced by someone more concerned about perfect lighting than real conversations, more interested in creating the image of a happy marriage than actually living one. Argument started in small ways at first, over the time Ali spent on his phone instead of with her, over the nights when she would go to bed alone, because he was still editing videos. But those small disagreements began to harden into silent walls between them. Days would pass with minimal conversation, their smiles turning into polite nods, their laughter replaced with sighs. There were moments when Aina looked at Ali and wondered if she was now just another part of his content, another piece of his online brand, rather than his partner in life. For Ali, the silence felt like rejection, and he interpreted it as a personal attack on everything he had worked for. He told himself she no longer understood the pressure he was under, that she did not see how important his growing fame could be for their future. But deep down, a seed of resentment was forming. When Aina asked for space, it was like a knife through Ali's pride. She told him she needed time to breathe, time to figure things out, and to be away from the constant tension that now filled their home. For Ali, this request was more than a personal blow. It was humiliation. He had built his online identity on the idea of being the man who had it all, the successful husband with a picture-perfect marriage. Being pushed out of their shared apartment meant admitting to the world that the life he had been selling might not be real. He left the apartment that day, but inside his mind something began to break. He could not shake the image of her living there without him, walking through rooms they had once shared, but now belonged to her alone. Every moment she spent without him became an unbearable thought. Ali told himself he would win her back. He would prove to her that he could be the man she had fallen in love with again. But beneath that determination there was another feeling, one far more dangerous: jealousy. It crept into his thoughts at night, when he could not sleep, and followed him in the daylight as he scrolled through social media. Every time Aina posted a picture smiling with friends, he felt a sting in his chest. He began to imagine what she was doing when he was not there. Who was she talking to? Who was she laughing with? The more he thought about it, the more the images in his head twisted into something dark and consuming. Luxury apartment that once symbolized their success now stood in his mind as a fortress keeping him out. He would think about the way the door felt closing behind him on the day he left, the click of the lock echoing like a final verdict. He remembered the way Aina looked at him when she asked for space, her eyes tired but resolute as if she had already made up her mind. He replayed that moment over and over, trying to find something in her face that would suggest hesitation, but all he found was determination. Outside of social media, Ali's life began to feel empty. The videos he posted became more frequent, but the joy he once had for creating them was gone. Instead, they felt like a shield to keep people from noticing how much he was unraveling. His followers still saw the stylish, confident man, but behind the camera he was pacing in his apartment, unable to focus on anything except Aina. He began driving past the building just to see the lights in the windows. He told himself it was harmless, that he just wanted to feel close to her again. But each time he left those drives, he felt a little more powerless and a little more angry. Anna, on the other hand, had started spending more time with friends, leaning on them for support as she tried to navigate the growing distance between her and Ali. She tried to keep things civil for the sake of their young daughter, but the constant tension made it nearly impossible. She avoided telling Ali too much about her daily life, knowing how quickly he could twist her words into accusations. Still, he found ways to know more than she told him. And with each new piece of information, his jealousy grew. Ali's mind worked in loops. He would tell himself he was losing her because he had not been paying enough attention, then he would swing to believing she was deliberately pushing him away for someone else. The thought of her moving on with another man was more than he could bear. It became the shadow that followed him through every moment of his day, whispering to him at night and gnawing at him. Every time he saw her face in his mind, he remembered the early days of their marriage, when they would explore the city together, laughing and holding hands, making plans for a life they thought they could control. They would talk about growing old together, about raising their daughter in a home filled with love. But now those memories felt like someone else's life, a story he had watched instead of lived. And the more he compared the past to the present, the more desperate he became to return to it, no matter the cost. Ali began to craft a narrative in his mind, one where Aina had already replaced him, where she was living happily in their home while he was left on the outside looking in. The narrative was built on suspicion and fear, but to him it felt like the truth. He convinced himself that if he could just know for sure, he could find a way to fix things. But the need for certainty became a dangerous obsession. It was no longer about fixing the marriage. It was about proving his own worth and regaining control over what he believed was his. The high-rise apartment became both a symbol of everything he had lost and a reminder of what he believed was stolen from him. Each time he imagined her there, without him, the vision grew more vivid, more unbearable. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, Ali began to think about what he was willing to do to take it all back. Ali's obsession grew into something that controlled every waking thought and poisoned every quiet moment he had. He could not simply walk away from the life he had built with Anna. He could not accept that the apartment, the furniture, the memories, and the woman he loved now existed in a world where he was not welcome. In his mind, their separation was temporary and on his terms, yet deep down he felt a constant fear that it was becoming permanent. This fear was not gentle. It was sharp and jagged, and every day it cut deeper into his mind. He began looking for ways to stay close to her without her knowing. The idea came to him one night while staring at his daughter's tablet. She used it for games and cartoons, but to him it became a tool, a lifeline into a space where he no longer had permission to be. He installed a listening application into the device. It was simple enough to hide within the settings where no one would notice. This allowed him to hear the sounds of the apartment even when he was miles away. At first he told himself this was for protection. He wanted to make sure Aina was safe and that their daughter was living in a secure environment. That was the story he repeated to himself over and over, but the truth was far more dangerous. He wanted to know what Aina was doing when he was not there, who she was speaking to, what she was laughing about. The first time he listened, it was nothing but the normal sounds of life. The clinking of dishes in the sink, the faint sound of a television in the background. It should have been harmless, but instead it pulled him in deeper. Each sound became a clue in his mind, each moment a piece of a puzzle that he thought would reveal the truth. He began listening every day for hours at a time. Sometimes it was quiet, and it made him restless. Sometimes Aina spoke to friends or family, and he would listen to every word, analyzing the tone of her voice, searching for hidden meanings. The obsession took root so strongly that he began structuring his day around the times when he could listen without interruption. It was during one of these sessions that something changed forever. He heard a male voice in the background. It was casual and friendly, but to Ali it sounded like betrayal. His mind exploded with questions and accusations. Who was this man? Why was he in the apartment? How long had this been happening? He could not think of a single explanation that did not end in the same conclusion. Aina was seeing someone else, and she was doing it in the very home they had built together. The sound of the man's voice replayed in his head over and over. It was not just a voice, it was a challenge. It was proof that someone else was taking his place. Ali's anger ignited instantly and burned hotter than anything he had felt before. His breathing grew heavy, as if each inhale was pulling more fire into his chest. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his fingertips. He could not sit still. He began pacing across the room, replaying the sound over and over in his mind. The idea of Aina with another man in their apartment felt like an insult that could not go unanswered. This was no longer about hurt feelings. This was about pride, about control, about proving that no one could take what belonged to him. Ali grabbed his keys and left his apartment without thinking of where he was going. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. He drove aimlessly, at first, his mind racing faster than the car. The streets blurred around him as the same thought looped endlessly in his head. She replaced me. She is with him right now. He imagined the scene as if he had seen it with his own eyes, and each time the image grew more vivid, more unbearable. In those moments, reason was gone. Logic was gone. All that was left was rage and the feeling that he had to do something about it immediately. When he finally pulled into his parking space, the plan had already formed in his mind. It was not something he spoke out loud even to himself, but it was there, unshakable and fully formed. He walked to a small drawer where he kept his gun. His hands moved quickly, as if they were acting on their own without the need for conscious thought. The metal felt cold and heavy, but also certain. This was the tool that would give him the control he felt slipping from his life. He tucked it away and grabbed his phone. He checked the location of the building and thought about the route that would get him there fastest. Every second mattered, because in his mind every second Aina spent with that man was another wound to his pride. He got into his car again, and this time the drive was different. His vision was narrowed and focused. The noise of the city faded into the background as his thoughts became a single sharp point. The man who had once danced for the camera and made light-hearted jokes was gone. In his place was someone who believed he had been wronged, and that this was the moment to take it all back. The elevator ride in his mind began before he even reached the building. He could see himself stepping inside the apartment and confronting them. He could see Aina's face when she realized he knew. He imagined the man trying to explain himself. And in all of these imagined scenarios, there was no ending where Ali simply walked away. The closer he got to the building, the heavier the air felt. He could feel the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on his shoulders, yet it did not stop him. If anything, it made him grip the wheel tighter and press harder on the gas. His mind was locked onto the idea that this was the only way to restore what he had lost. By the time he pulled up to the familiar high-rise, the decision was no longer a question. It was a certainty. He stepped out of the car with a sense of purpose that masked the chaos inside him. Every step toward the entrance felt like the beat of a war drum echoing in his ears. The building's glass doors reflected his image back at him, but it was a version of himself he no longer recognized. The eyes staring back were colder, sharper, and ready for whatever came next. The lobby was quiet and still, but Ali's heartbeat filled the silence. He pressed the elevator button and waited. His mind replayed the voice he had heard over the iPad. It was not just a sound anymore. It was a provocation, an enemy, an intruder who had dared to step into his life. He imagined what they were doing at that very moment. His jaw tightened, his muscles tense as the elevator doors finally slid open. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the floor he once called home. The ride up was both instant and eternal, his mind spinning faster than the numbers on the display. Each ding of the elevator felt like a countdown to the moment he had been building toward since the day Aina told him to leave. He stood in the middle of the elevator staring at the silver doors, his reflection slightly distorted in the metal. He adjusted his grip on the weapon hidden in his clothing. The thought of turning back did not exist in his mind anymore. This was no longer a situation to be solved with words. It was something that demanded action, at least in the world his mind had created for him. The moment the elevator slowed, he felt his breathing grow heavier. The doors began to open, and the bright hallway came into view. The hallway stretched out before him, lined with polished doors and soft lighting that gave the illusion of warmth, but to Ali it felt like a tunnel leading him straight into the heart of everything that had been eating away at him. His steps were slow at first, but deliberate, each one echoing faintly against the carpeted floor, as if the building itself was holding its breath. His mind was no longer drifting into memories or what-ifs. Every thought was fixed on what waited behind that one door. He could picture the layout of the apartment as clearly as if he were standing inside it already. He knew exactly where Aina might be sitting and where the man would be. He could almost hear their voices through the door, though the hallway was silent. The air felt heavier with each step, and his heartbeat began to sync with his pace until it was a steady drumbeat of determination. He stopped outside the apartment door and stared at it for a long moment. This was the door he had walked through countless times as a husband and father. It had been the gateway to warmth and safety once. Now it felt like a barrier that mocked him, holding inside the life he had been pushed out of. His hand hovered near the handle, and for a brief moment, there was a flash of hesitation. Not hesitation to enter, but hesitation in deciding how he would enter. He wanted them to see him the instant he stepped inside. He wanted them to know that he had heard every word, every laugh, every sound. He wanted to strip away whatever comfort they felt in that moment. His grip tightened, and the muscles in his jaw locked into place. He opened the door without announcing himself. The sound of it swinging open was sharp against the stillness, and for a second, everything seemed frozen. Aina was in the living room, standing beside the couch, her face turning toward him in shock. The man Rayburn Barron was sitting nearby, and his eyes widened the instant he realized who had just walked in. The tension was instant, like an electric current filling the space. Ali stepped inside, his eyes fixed on them both, his mind blank to everything but the image before him. There were no greetings, no questions, no attempts to disguise why he was there. The silence was thick, but beneath it, there was a boiling rage that had been building for weeks. Ana's voice broke the silence first, but the words barely registered in Ali's mind. He heard her tone more than the meaning of her words. It was defensive and filled with disbelief, as if she was demanding to know how he had gotten in. The man shifted slightly in his seat, perhaps instinctively preparing to stand, but to Ali, it looked like an attempt to challenge him. His vision tunneled, locking only on their faces, and his hand moved almost on its own. The weight of the gun in his grip was grounding him in this moment. There was no time for explanations, no time for them to weave stories or excuses. Every image, every suspicion, every sound he had imagined over the past days and nights came crashing together in one instant. First shot rang out in the enclosed space, a deafening crack that seemed to shake the walls. Aina's body jerked, and her eyes went wide, as if she could not believe what was happening. She staggered backward, the force of the bullet stealing the air from her lungs. Ali's heart was pounding harder now, but not from fear. His body moved with a precision that came from a place far deeper than conscious thought. Before the echo of the first shot had even faded, the second one came tearing through the air, aimed at Rayburn. The man's expression froze in a mix of shock and horror, and then he crumpled, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud that seemed to make the room grow even quieter. The smell of gunpowder filled the apartment, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. Aina had fallen beside the couch, her body limp and her eyes staring upward as if searching for something she could no longer see. Rayburn's still form lay only a few feet away, his final expression etched into his face. The silence that followed was absolute, as though the building itself had gone still in response to what had just taken place. The walls that had once echoed with music and laughter now absorbed the weight of the violence that had shattered them. In the corner, a framed picture of the family sat undisturbed on a shelf, a reminder of a life that no longer existed. Ali stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the gun still firm in his hand. His mind was not blank now. It was flooded with the reality of what he had done, yet also wrapped in a strange clarity. The rage that had driven him here had burned through him, leaving only a hollow certainty. He looked at Aina's body, and for a brief moment flashes of their life together came to him. Their first apartment, the day their daughter was born, the trips they took, and the quiet nights when it felt like they could face anything as long as they were together. But those memories now felt distant, almost as if they belonged to someone else. The man he was then no longer existed. The man standing here now was defined entirely by this moment. He took a step back, surveying the scene as if trying to memorize every detail. The furniture was in perfect place, untouched except for the blood now staining the carpet. The air felt heavy and still, almost unnatural. The sound of his own breathing was the only thing that reminded him the world outside this room still existed. He could hear faint noises from the street far below, but they seemed too distant to matter. The apartment was its own sealed world, now a world that had shifted permanently in the span of seconds. He glanced toward the door, realizing it was still open slightly, as if inviting the world to witness what had happened. His hands felt steady despite the enormity of what had just unfolded. He looked down at the gun in his hand, its dark metal, now a part of this scene as much as the bodies on the body floor. He thought about setting it down, but his grip did not loosen. It was as though releasing it would be admitting something final, something irreversible. Instead, he took another slow breath and tried to listen to the sound of his own heartbeat, as if it might guide him on what to do next. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second marking the time between the life he had before and the life that would follow from this point on. The separation was absolute. There was no path back to the man who had once laughed for the camera or held his daughter in his arms at night. There was only this moment and whatever came after it. The room felt like it had been drained of all sound, yet the weight of what had just happened seemed to press down on every object, every wall, every shadow. Ali stood in the middle of it, his breath slow and heavy, as if he was trying to make sense of the stillness around him. He could feel the gun in his hand, its cold weight unchanged, even though everything else in his life had just shifted beyond recognition. His eyes moved between Aina and Rayburn, their bodies lying motionless on the floor. There was no movement, no sound, just the finality of what had been done. The silence in the apartment was so complete that even the faint ticking of the wall clock seemed unnaturally loud. It marked the seconds, but each one felt disconnected from the last, as though time had splintered. Felt a strange calm settle over him, not the kind of calm that comes with peace, but the heavy, unshakable stillness that follows a violent storm. His breathing had steadied, and for a moment he simply stood there staring, as if committing every detail of the scene to memory. The light from the windows spilled across the floor in long golden stripes, cutting through the shadowed corners of the room. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, almost oblivious to the fact that the world in this apartment had just been irrevocably altered. The faint hum of the refrigerator sounded from the kitchen, a reminder of the mundane life that had existed here. Just minutes before, in the middle of this silence, his phone buzzed faintly in his pocket. The sound felt strange and out of place, as though it did not belong in this new reality. He pulled it out without thinking, and saw his daughter's name on the screen. For the first time since entering the apartment, his expression shifted. Her name cut through the haze in his mind with a sharp clarity. He answered without hesitation, and the small voice on the other end greeted him with a warmth that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. She asked where he was, and his voice trembled slightly, though he tried to keep it steady. The words slipped out before he could think about them. He told her that he had hurt Mommy. The statement hung in the air between them, heavy and unchangeable. There was no way to explain to her what that meant, no way to soften it. Her voice on the other end was quiet for a moment, and in that silence he felt something crack inside him. When the call ended, he looked back around the apartment. It felt different now, not just because of what had happened, but because the connection to his daughter had reminded him of what would come next. He could not stay here. The thought was not driven by panic, but by inevitability. He knew that soon the world outside this apartment would know what he had done. The police would arrive, the questions would begin, the trial would follow. Each step of that future was already unfolding in his mind, as if it had been written long before this moment, yet there was no rush in his movements. He walked slowly toward the door, glancing once more at the faces that had moments ago been alive and breathing. There was no satisfaction, no triumph. Only an empty certainty. Stepping into the hallway, the soft lighting felt colder than when he had walked in. His footsteps echoed faintly, and for a moment he thought about the neighbors behind the closed doors. Did they hear the shots? Were they calling the police now? The building felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. As he waited, he could hear faint sirens in the distance, though it was impossible to tell if they were coming for him yet. The ride down was silent, except for the hum of the machinery and the faint vibration under his feet. Each floor that passed brought him closer to the ground, but also closer to the reality of what awaited outside. When the doors slid open, the lobby was as still as it had been when he arrived. The receptionist was gone, or perhaps had stepped away, leaving the space empty. He walked toward the glass doors and pushed them open, stepping into the fading light of late afternoon. The city was alive out here. Cars moved along the street, people walked past with bags in their hands and phones pressed to their ears. It felt almost surreal that the world could continue on as if nothing had happened just floors above. He walked to his car and slid into the driver's seat. For a moment he simply sat there, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on a point far away. Then he turned the key and the engine rumbled to life. The drive was not fast. He moved through the streets with a strange patience, as though every stoplight was just another moment to think. His mind was a whirl of images. The sound of the gunshots, the look in Anna's eyes, the voice of his daughter, the sirens that had seemed so far away. He knew there was no escaping what had happened. Every turn he took felt like it was leading him toward the inevitable point where the flashing lights would appear in his mirror. And when they finally did, there was no surprise. He pulled over without resistance, watching as the police vehicles surrounded him, their doors opening, their voices calling out commands. He stepped out slowly, his hands raised. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked into place and the finality of it settled over him like a heavy blanket. The ride in the back of the patrol car was silent except for the faint sound of the radio chatter from the front. Through the window, the city passed by in streaks of color and light, but it all felt distant now, as if he was watching it from somewhere far away. At the station, the process was mechanical. His belongings were taken, his photograph was captured, his fingerprints pressed onto paper. The questions began, but he answered little. There was nothing to explain that could undo what had been done. The weight of the charges against him was clear from the start. 2 lives taken, a family destroyed, a future rewritten in a single afternoon. The trial that followed was long and filled with every detail of his life, laid bare for strangers to examine. The prosecution painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and control, a man who could not accept losing what he believed belonged to him. The defense tried to offer explanations to cast doubt, to suggest that this was a moment of passion rather than premeditation. But the evidence was unshakable. The recordings from the iPad, the timeline of his movements, the witnesses who had heard the gunshots all formed a chain that could not be broken. Through it all, Ali sat in the courtroom, listening to the words being spoken about him as though they were describing someone else. The faces in the gallery were a mix of grief and anger, and sometimes pity. Aina's family sat in silence, their eyes fixed on him, their pain and unspoken presence that filled the room. When the verdict came, it was delivered without hesitation. Guilty. The word rang in his ears with a finality that left no room for argument. He felt the weight of it press into him as the judge read out the sentence. The years stretched out before him like an endless road with no turns and no exit. As the bailiffs led him from the courtroom, he glanced once toward the gallery. There was no forgiveness in the eyes that met his. Only the truth of what he had done reflected back at him. The cell was small and cold, the walls bare, except for faint marks left by those who had been there before him. The bed was narrow, the mattress thin. The air smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant. In the stillness of those first nights, he replayed everything in his mind, not just the day of the murders, but the years leading up to it. The arguments, the laughter, the moments when things might have been different if one choice had gone another way. Outside, the cell life continued without him. The world moved on, but within those walls, time felt slow and unchanging. His TikTok fame meant nothing here. The followers, the likes, the carefully crafted videos were now just fragments of a life that had ended the moment he stepped into that apartment. The man who had once been known for charm and online charisma was now just another inmate defined only by the crime that had stolen 2 lives and left countless others shattered. In the end, the city that had once celebrated him forgot his name as quickly as it had risen, and the echoes of his fame faded into the silence of a prison cell, where every night the darkness reminded him that this was all that remained of the life he had destroyed.